So despite the chaos at the heart of her government, Theresa May claims she is not for turning. At a news conference inside Number 10 this afternoon, she defended her Brexit plan to the very hilt. Leadership, she said, was about taking the right decisions, not the easy ones, declaring she believed with every fibre of my being that the deal was right for the country. But all this after a day of deepening political turmoil. The first resignations came before 9 o'clock this morning, followed by a series of others, like toppling dominoes. At the same time, the plot against Mrs May's leadership thickens. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. What do we know of plots?
This has, as you say, been the most extraordinary day, and we are not through all the drama yet. It is possible that there could be another major ministerial resignation. It looks as though Michael...
You know who?
Well, it looks as though Michael Gove was offered the job of Brexit Secretary, Dom Raab's job. But suddenly, Michael Gove, the man who sang the virtues of Theresa May's policy in Cabinet yesterday, seemed to be sort of frozen by this moment and felt that actually, now he thought about it, this wasn't a policy that he could take on. And I think he is currently wrestling with his conscience and with different voices in different ears. This day could end with another cabinet resignation of the one Brexiteer who actually backed the policy yesterday. We don't know that yet, but that is yet another thing that is a cloud that is hanging over Theresa May as we speak. It was the most extraordinary moment when she went into the House of Commons earlier. Long time taking questions, the whole atmosphere very glum. It was an hour before one supportive Tory got up to say anything that she really wanted to hear about her deal. We calculate that 37% of the Tories who spoke actually backed her, so it did improve a bit later, but that really was nothing. And then, straight off the back of that, she had this uprising led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, people making a push for a vote of no confidence in her, fighting on another front. And talking to people tonight, it is very clear that the guiding principle of that uprising is people who want no deal. They don't trust her if her deal is blocked in the House of Commons, not to revert to no deal, even though she's always had this mantra, hasn't she? No deal is better than a bad deal. They don't trust her to do that. They think that she would suddenly leap over across the floor and cut some other deal with Jeremy Corbyn to try and get Labour on board, which would be much closer to Labour's very, very soft Brexit. And they're terrified of that. So action on many fronts. And of course, this is exactly the moment when she wanted to be selling the deal. Everything else is blocking all that out. We saw a little bit of the grid that they wanted to be working to in terms of selling the deal. My goodness, they're off the grid. This is how the day went here.
She just got news of a second cabinet resignation as she left Number 10. The Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, told her last night he couldn't stay in the government. And then she was off to Parliament.
The Prime Minister!
To defend a deal which MP after MP told her was already a lost cause.
The government simply cannot put to Parliament this half-baked deal that both the Brexit Secretary and his predecessor have rejected.
The Prime Minister comes before us today trying to sell us a deal that is already dead in the water.
So it's quite clear she cannot command the House of Commons on these proposals.
It will be blindingly obvious to the entire country that the Prime Minister's deal cannot pass this House.
Theresa May ignored those challenges but acknowledged the backstop arrangement she'd produced yesterday was a compromise that left even her uncomfortable.
I do not pretend that this has been a comfortable process, or that either we or the EU are entirely happy with all of the arrangements that have been included within it. But of course this is the case. This is an arrangement that we have both said we never want to have to use.
She faced a bruising question from the DUP, sounding like a party on the point of withdrawing its support for the government.
I could today stand here and take the Prime Minister through the list of promises and pledges that she made to this House and to us privately about the future of Northern Ireland in the future relationship with the EU. But I fear it would be a waste of time since she clearly doesn't listen.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
And then, as if she didn't have enough drama in her life, a threat by the leader of the Brexiteer hardliners to write letters to the chairman of the 1922 committee, sitting screen top right, demanding a vote of no confidence in her leadership.
My right honourable friend said that we would be out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Article 174 says otherwise. As what my right honourable friend says and what my right honourable friend does no longer match, should I not write to my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West?
Her answer was never going to move him. Jacob Rees-Mogg and some of his faction sent in those letters demanding a vote of no confidence, hoping they can defeat her and get one of their own to number 10.
You've got Boris Johnson and David Davis, and you've got Dominic Raab and Esther McVeigh, you've got Penny Mordaunt. You have streams of talent within the Conservative Party who would be very capable of leading a proper Brexit.
People have said World Trade Organization rules are not something that we need to fear.
That sounds like that is part of the strategy of this uprising. It's the no deal uprising.
Because don't forget, it's not no deal. We don't have deals with a lot of countries we trade with now outside of the European Union.
You don't think this is a good idea. What's the strategy, do you think, behind those people, your colleagues and friends, who are pushing for the Prime Minister to be toppled?
They believe that she's going to panic after we vote down the deal, and she's going to do a deal with the Labour Party to keep us in some customs union or whatever. I don't know about all that.
There was a brief birthday drop-in at Clarence House with other party leaders, but there were cabinet jobs to fill back at the office. And at a press conference, Theresa May was asked if it was true Michael Gove had been offered the job of Brexit Secretary, but had said he'd only take it if he could renegotiate the deal.
There are reports tonight that Michael Gove has been asked to become the new Brexit Secretary, but that he will only take that job on condition that he is allowed to go back to Brussels and try for more concessions. There have been no announcements yet on any appointments to replace people who've resigned. Are you struggling to find people who want to fill those roles?
Now, I've had actually rather a busy day, as you might have seen, 3 hours in the House of Commons. Seriously, look, Michael has been doing an excellent job at DEFRA, and particularly in his defence of the fishing industry.
Will there be any more resignations this morning?
The Chief Whip, like the Prime Minister, fighting on two fronts tonight for her job and her Europe policy.
The Prime Minister will not be bullied and will not change course, and the Government and the Cabinet made a definite decision to back the deal, and we'll be looking forward to the November Council. I'm going to have to go because the Prime Minister's making a statement.
More resignations, Mr. Smith?
I don't know.
Does this look like a government that's disintegrating in front of you?
It is dissolving today.
Rallying for the Prime Minister has not yet hit fever pitch. It's been said there are some people in there, perhaps some surprising colleagues of yours, who are now beginning to think, well, maybe this whole project, the Theresa May project, her particular approach to Brexit, her premiership, is over.
There may be people who think that. There probably are. But let those who think that come and say how they would do it differently and better.
One of my cricket heroes was always Geoffrey Boycott. And what did you know about Geoffrey Boycott? Geoffrey Boycott stuck to it, and he got the runs in the end. Thank you.
It's a line she's often used, but will it be enough?
Gary Gibbon. Well, now, with me is the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, who seems to be talking for the government tonight.
Hi.
Damien Hines, yesterday, Mrs May said it's my deal, or no Brexit. We're down to no deal and no Brexit, correct?
No, I mean, this is a deal that's the deal that the Prime Minister has come back with. Still a draft deal. There's still some more work to do in it. There's the European Council to come on the 25th of November. But it's a good deal for Britain. It delivers on the Brexit result, to end free movement, to stop giving money ad infinitum in large quantities to Brussels, but also in a way that's good for trade with Europe.
I mean, we've heard all that from the Prime Minister.
Well, no, it's important. Hang on, it's important.
But let me put it to you this way.
And it's good for people's jobs.
That the man who negotiated this, Dominic Raab, thought it stank so badly that he's resigned himself. So what was she doing defending something the person she'd employed to negotiate didn't want?
Well, look, you've got to look at the deal that's on the table against some viable, alternative. And of course, people will find things that they don't like in what is quite a substantial package. And anybody probably could find something they don't like in it.
But he negotiated it.
But it is an overall package. And you've got to say, is there something else that's available which is better? There are people in this country who want to thwart the Brexit process altogether. You can hear some of them over there, and there are people in Parliament who believe that too. There are other people who want to have a no deal. I think either of those two things would be very bad for our country.
Right. Well,
and this deal is going to be good for our country.
Will the next Brexit secretary be able to renegotiate this negotiation?
I don't think you can go back and totally renegotiate, because if you
but
do...
will you be able to renegotiate bits?
This is after months and months of negotiating to get the best outcome for our country, also a good outcome for the others, but actually a good outcome for our country. And if we went back and tried to open it up again, I mean, you can't guarantee it would get better. Other things would be opened up as well.
So if you can't get this through the House of Commons, that one is dead, and then what are you left with?
Well, I think we can get through the House of Commons.
But I ask you what happens if you can't.
Well, I don't accept that premise, because what we're engaged in is making the case for this package and asking people, think about, don't just think, do you love this package? Do you like every element of it? But say, how does it compare to something else? Do you know of something else which can be delivered,
I'll ask you that very question.
Which would be better?
How does it compare with being in the European Union? It sounds a much worse deal.
Well, look, we had a vote in 2016.
But you said, how does it compare? And I'm asking you.
Well, there are things that are different, clearly.
You're a Remainer, you can't be very happy.
But we would keep good trading arrangements with Europe, including frictionless trade at the border, leveraging our strength in services, but being able to end free movement, and that is very important, and being able to strike new trade deals across the world, which we weren't able to do before.
Like many people, made a reasoned decision, and your decision was that you were a Remainer.
Correct.
Do you sleep easy at night, thinking that this deal is in some way better than being in the European Union?
I sleep easy at night because I was elected to this Parliament to be a Democrat. Yes, I campaigned for Remain. I don't resile from the things I said at the time. But, the leaders of the three biggest political parties argued to people to vote one way. They voted the other way. We have to live up to that. We have to deliver on that, but make sure we do it in a way which is good for people's jobs, good for our economy.
Damien Hines, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Well, Labour today indicated it would vote down the Prime Minister's Brexit deal and called for Theresa May to withdraw it. But by doing so, will they deliver what their supporters want? I'm joined now by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. John McDonnell, I can put the same question to you. You are not accepting this deal, that's correct, right?
Can't support it. It's not going to protect jobs in the economy, so there's no way we could vote for a bad deal like this.
So if Mrs May remains Prime Minister, she's only got two options, because you're going to vote down the other one. You'll be joined by the DUP and the European objectors like ReesMogg, etc. And you can defeat the government.
Let's go through the options. I don't think there are only two. I think there's a majority in the House of Commons now opposed to this deal that she's brought forward. I also think there's an overwhelming majority, again, opposed to no deal. So people want to have some form of deal. We believe we can negotiate a deal which can protect jobs in the economy based upon a permanent customs union, close collaborative relationship with the single market, protecting workers, employment rights, consumer rights and environmental rights.
Can I pause you for a moment? I mean, we're talking about a negotiation which will take months. Now, on March the 29th, we're supposed to leave the European Union. That's obviously becoming a very ludicrous date.
We think if the government moves over, because they're only a minority government, it's a minority party in control of the government at the moment, let the opposition take over, we can get the negotiations underway. We think we can achieve a Brexit which will protect the jobs in the economy. And if the government doesn't move over, let's have a general election.
Now, you see, the fact is that if you listen to many members of the Labour Party and many shadow ministers, they're not at all happy about any of this. But your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is so opposed to the European Union that he would not brook any kind of relationship like this one, the one that Mrs May has articulated, which you're going to reject and agreed, but he wouldn't consider any possibility of remaining in Europe.
No, what he said very, very clearly is what Labour Party policy is, that we want to create a negotiating environment, and we think we can do that in government.
Yes, with a single market and with a
that gives us a Brexit that will protect jobs in the economy.
But that is precisely a Brexit that leaves no British power in Europe to negotiate any of these things.
Well, I disagree.
Rules will be set by people that
I disagree, because if we're in a customs union We're saying within that customs union we want to ensure that we have a significant say in future trade deals, which has a large market.
But to have a significant say, you have to be members of the European Union.
No, if you're in a customs union, that would be part of that membership. That would enable us to happen. With regard to a single market, that will give us the tariff-free access that we want. And we want to ensure that we have those protections for workers, environment, consumers. I think that's all achievable.
All right.
It isn't under this government. That's why we're saying move to one side, let us get on with the negotiations. If not, general election.
You're a seasoned politician. You've been around a long time. What's going to happen?
The way it's happening is so unpredictable. The Conservative Party are falling apart. You've seen today they've lost the support of the DUP. I can't see that they're sustainable in these negotiations. I'm not sure if they're sustainable in government. That's why I'm saying to them, in the interest of the country, move over.
And you think you could win that election?
Constitutionally, they should just move over and let us see whether we can form a government. If not, let's have that election. I'm confident that we can.
John McDonnell, thank you very much for joining us. Well, the mood on the markets is volatile, to say the very least. City regulators summoned Britain's biggest banks today to discuss the turbulence after the continuing Brexit chaos sent the pound and share prices plunging. Business leaders had initially welcomed Theresa May's draft agreement, but now all those hopes of certainty seem to be as distant as ever. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this report.
While the politicians go hammer and tongs in Westminster, here they're hammering out metal packaging for big customers like Boots and the Body Shop at this factory in Thamesmead. The production line may be smooth, but the Brexit process that determines their future is anything but.
This business encapsulates all the challenges of Brexit. It's seeing consumer demand falling here in the UK, while at the same time new potential customers are rattled. It's having to look for warehousing space to stockpile products, and it may even have to open new manufacturing facilities in Europe if there's no deal. Now extrapolate that to the tens of thousands of small and medium businesses in the UK, and it paints a bleak picture.
And then came the resignation of the Brexit secretary himself.
It's just completely crazy. I just cannot see how you could be part of the agreement that's being proposed and then you resign because of it.
Like many companies, the EU represents a huge chunk, in Chris Saunders' case, 40% of his overall business. So if the already fragile deal is sunk by politicians, his business would be right on the edge.
Worst case scenario, if there is a no deal, what does that mean for you?
The only thing we'd be able to do is to look at setting up a plant in mainland Europe. And of course that will mean jobs will go in the UK and we would be certainly moving part of the operation over to mainland Europe. I don't think we'd have any choice. What are we going to do if we find ourselves in a no-deal situation?
And it was that reality that was weighing heavily on the markets today. Here's what happened to the value of the pound the moment Dominic Raab tweeted his resignation at 8:53 a.m. And FTSE firms exposed to the UK economy, notably the banks and house builders, were also in the red as traders bet the chaos in Westminster would hit spending and investment, further dragging down an already sluggish economy. Nothing sluggish about a high-end Aston Martin. Of course, they're reserved only for the wealthiest, but it does employ hundreds of workers. And the boss of this most iconic British brand says even they're not immune.
We still have to worry about parts. We run a just-in-time manufacturing system. We have generally 3 days of stock. We have 3,900 parts which are crossing the channel. One of those parts gets stuck at the port, production stops.
Did you ever in your wildest dreams think that we would be here where we are today at the end of 2018?
When the vote happened, I famously quoted that, for me, that it was unthinkable that you only needed to put sensible people around a table and you would inevitably come to a deal. I'm looking a bit foolish, I guess.
He was one of the few bosses to put his head above the parapet. Even those in Theresa May's 5 business councils were decidedly camera shy. But these written statements from Airbus, BMW and Siemens to Channel 4 News echoed the wider sentiment.
We look forward to further clarity and the removal of uncertainty.
We recognise that the situation remains politically uncertain. We must therefore continue to prepare for the worst-case scenario.
Keep calm and support the deal.
But it's a deal that's very much hanging in the balance. Last night it seemed the crisis had been contained, but today business fears their friction-free Brexit could be slipping away.
We'll be back later in the programme with the latest from here in Westminster. Let's go now over to Matt, back in the studio.
Thanks, John. So what's been the response from Europe? Let's call the whole thing off, according to European Council President Donald Tusk, who suggested that the EU was, of course, best prepared for a no-Brexit scenario. Quite the opposite reaction from the French Prime Minister, who said that Paris was getting prepared for a no-deal scenario. As I discovered in Brussels in the last 24 hours, all that talk of no Brexit and no deal overshadowed what the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, considered a proud and historic compromise. No, it's not an extraterrestrial spaceship, but the sphere of the European Council, which today seemed like a parallel universe to the shambolic events in London. Shuffling between EU buildings, Michel Barnier has been showing off his proud 585-page creation like a newborn baby. Here he was last night, lovingly cradling the document, the fruit of 17 months of painstaking gestation. Was he at all worried that it might be strangled soon after birth in London?
The two negotiators, the two negotiating team have taken their responsibility. The British government has taken today, this evening, its responsibility. And now everybody on both sides have to take their responsibility.
A tall order. Later, I try again. Mr. Barnier, Matt Fright from Channel 4 News. How worried are you that the British Parliament will destroy all the good works of the last 17 months?
I don't give you the answer. Yes. I think that everybody has to take its responsibility. I don't want to comment what will happen in the domestic policy.
Undeterred, Mr. Barnier carried on parading the creation around its new godparents. Early this morning, he allowed Donald Tusk to have a peek. Considering that the EU never wanted the Brexit child, they've shown far more affection for it than the London parent who originally called for its conception.
If nothing extraordinary happens, we will hold a European Council meeting in order to finalise and formalise the Brexit agreement.
But in London, the extraordinary has become the ordinary. Mr. Barnier was off again, this time to Strasbourg and the European Parliament, where they were also handed a copy. By now, news was filtering through that the newborn was in trouble, that the christening summit at the end of November might never even take place, and yes, that all this chaos might even have a silver lining. By this afternoon, Donald Tusk was mouthing an option that had not dared to speak its name.
All I can say is that the EU is prepared for a final deal with the United Kingdom in November. We are also prepared for a no-deal scenario. But of course we are best prepared for a no-Brexit scenario.
But from inside the egg, also a very clear message to London. The deal is the best on offer. Don't even think about renegotiating it. You live with the child you've conceived, not the child you ideally want. Well, in the last hour, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that the worst-case scenario is a no-deal Brexit and said that it's now up to the UK and other member states to finalise the deal that is on the table.
Wir haben doch jetzt ein Dokument auf dem Tisch, dem haben Großbritannien.
We now have a document on the table that Britain and the EU27 have agreed to. For me, there's no question at the moment whether we'll negotiate further. Both negotiating partners went home with the understanding that this is the potential exit deal.
Michael, as it stands, we don't seem to have a Brexit secretary tonight. What's the latest?
We don't have a Brexit secretary, we don't have a work and pension secretary yet. The chief whip
just walked back into Downing Street. It looks like it could be a long evening. Theresa May was asked at her press conference why we hadn't got a Brexit secretary yet. She said it's been a busy day. It has. Rarely can a Prime Minister have answered questions in public for 3.5 hours. The speculation tonight is around Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, and Penny Mordaunt, the Development Secretary. Might they resign? Might they be in line for new jobs? Michael Gove's thought to be mulling this over. Penny Mordaunt was in Downing Street for an hour after the press conference. She then drove herself home rather than go in a government car, but she said we shouldn't read too much into that, which suggests to me that she is staying on, but who knows whether she's got a new job. The problem with Brexit Secretary, of course, is that Brexiters have held that job twice before and ended up resigning because they haven't been able to influence the deal in the way they wanted.
Michael, matters beyond that door behind you. A lot of talk today about a possible leadership election. Is it going to happen?
Well, indeed, earlier this afternoon when Jacob Rees-Mogg announced he'd written a letter to Graham Brady of the 1922 committee asking for a no-confidence vote, it looked like they were going to reach the magic threshold of 48, which would trigger such a no-confidence vote. But that hasn't happened today. Earlier at lunchtime, I went to the meeting of the European Research Group, or rather I stood outside it. Unfortunately, there was a glass panel in the committee room door, so you could see what was going on inside. There were about 35, 40 people in there, including Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan Smith, the last Tory leader to suffer a no-confidence vote, but perhaps not the numbers that you might expect. The group is meant to be a fair bit bigger than that. And interestingly, it's clear there were divisions. Rees-Mogg was clapped and with the traditional thumping of the desks after he made his speech. But Sir Edward Lee came out and said there were differences within the group, and Rees-Mogg confirmed this later. There are those members of the ERG who think that a leadership election, a no-confidence vote right now would be counterproductive, that Theresa May would win it, and that would reinforce her position, and they couldn't then have another no-confidence vote under the rules for another 12 months. If one is to happen, it could happen as early as Monday or Tuesday if the 48 figure is suddenly reached. But at the moment, we've only got about 10 names that we know have written letters so far, but that could change tonight or tomorrow. But Theresa May made it clear in her press conference she's going to fight on.
Michael Crick at number 10. Ken Clarke has long been one of the most pro-European of the Conservatives. Now his party is facing possibly the biggest crisis it's seen during the 48 years he's been spending in Parliament. He joins me now. Ken Clarke, can you think of any day as chaotic as this?
No, we had quite a lot of crises when we were joining the European Union, when the party was split, the Enoch Powell and the imperialists against us and relying on Jenkinsite Labour. We had a lot of trouble over Maastricht, it was very nasty. This is far, far worse, and it's more chaotic, and nobody has a clue where we're going in the next few weeks.
Michael Crick was just reporting on the numbers of people that seem to be sending in letters to demand the head of Mrs May and an election. What's your view on that?
A bit of a footnote, I think. And Brexiteers are doing that when they can't think of anything else to do, and they keep thinking that threatening her will get her to back down in their direction even further. But actually, she will win a confidence motion amongst Conservative MPs. Perversely, it might strengthen her briefly, but it will rather divert us from the more serious business. How are we supposed to be looking after the national interests and avoiding damaging our trade, our investments, our jobs in the new year?
Well, now she says that what is really preoccupying every fibre of her body is getting her deal through the Commons.
Well, I admire that. Her resilience is quite remarkable. I think she'll have to be a little flexible. After today's exchanges, I can't see how she gets a majority. The vote's a few weeks away yet in Parliament, but I mean, it looks quite hopeless. She's going to have to actually make a wider appeal, stop making concessions to these hard right-wing nationalists who obviously hate her and are trying to get rid of her and are not going to compromise, and actually seek a broader appeal, a softer Brexit, if you like, which might command some cross-party support, because across parties, the majority of members of Parliament don't want to damage our economic relationships with the continent and are quite content to see the best of the single market and the customs union continue.
What do you make of a Brexit secretary now, the late Brexit secretary in terms of political nomenclature? What do you make of somebody who nominally puts his name to this document that she's been thrashing about, that Mrs May has in her hand, but not in fact believing in it and then resigning because he hates it?
Well, I'm not going to attack Dominic. I mean, he's in an impossible position. She's insisted on appointing very hardline Brexiteers to negotiate the deal. And this is the second one who's finally decided that there's a high and dry, and upon reflection, they don't like the deal, and they're very worried about compromising themselves with their right-wing colleagues in the party.
Well,
so
look,
I don't know how far Dominic tried to steer away from what, for a few hours, he signed up to.
Well, in the last 30 seconds we have, put your 48 years of experience in the House of Commons to the test. What's going to happen in the next 3 months?
Anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen in the next 3 months is deceiving themselves. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days. I hope that parliamentary democracy will regain some courage. We're all pursuing the national interest. The vast majority of us, the vast majority do not want to damage the economy or future generations. Theresa's got to be a bit flexible. On both sides, people have got to be pragmatic. And the Corbynistas are a waste of time, they're hardline Brexiteers. Jacob Rees-Mogg's followers are a waste of time, they're hardline nationalists. But in between, it's time for all good men to come rally to the interests of the country, to use a corny phrase.
Ken Clark, thank you for joining us. Well, tonight we have correspondents live in key cities around the country. In Belfast, where political leaders are warning that this is not a time for incendiary language. In Edinburgh, where Scotland's government say they've been totally sidelined by Theresa May's deal. And in Cheshire, in the constituency of Esther McVeigh, one of the cabinet ministers who resigned today. Well, let's go first to Porrick O'Brien in Belfast. Northern Irish political leaders met the Irish Taoiseach earlier today without the DUP. That is, they're furious about the backstop deal, claiming it will lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom. Earlier, we caught up with one of the UK government ministers who's been speaking in support of Theresa May and her deal. Porrick.
John, I'm standing here in front of the Titanic Museum, close to the spot where the ship was built, trying to resist the urge of the clunky metaphor. Let me paint a picture of the big political picture here in Belfast at the moment. Remember, the majority of people here in Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union. The Democratic Unionist Party, who were propping up Theresa May's government, now pose an existential threat to said government. The main opposition party, Sinn Féin, don't take their seats at Westminster. And against the backdrop of all of that, government stormont here, not working at all, in shutdown. I can resist the clunky metaphor no longer. If the withdrawal agreement for Northern Ireland was an ocean liner, what sort of ship would it be? Two were built side by side on the docks here. RMS Olympic, nicknamed Old Reliable. And its sister, well, you know the story. The task of selling the deal to business leaders fell to the Northern Irish Secretary, Karen Bradley, here this evening.
It's been an interesting day.
The day had started with a junior Northern Ireland minister resigning over the deal. And as you've heard, that was just the start of it. Minister, how would you describe the car crash that's unfolding in London at the moment?
I wouldn't describe it in that way at all. I would describe it as a very difficult decision. And government takes difficult decisions, and this is probably one of the most difficult decisions that government faces. How do we deliver on the vote of the British people that was made 2.5 years ago to leave the European Union? And it's not easy, but I support the Prime Minister. There's no better person to do this job. I supported her for leadership in 2016 because this is a woman that gets the job done.
Yesterday, businesses were digesting the draft agreement with cautious optimism, the DUP, though, doing the opposite. In Dublin, the Taoiseach was hailing it as a genuine economic opportunity for Northern Ireland. But that was yesterday. Today, the focus, what will become of Theresa May's government.
I think it's going to wreck the country, to be honest with you. I think that it's going to wreck the government. It's going to wreck things back in Northern Ireland here.
And I think the demand has to be general election now. We've had enough.
But admiration for the Prime Minister too. For this lever cometh the hour, cometh the woman.
I think what we've seen of the EU over the past couple of years really shows perhaps that that was the right thing to do. It's a bit like the Hotel California. You know, you can check out any time, but you can never leave.
At least one vote of confidence then in the captain. We struggle to find anyone, though, here with much confidence at all in the ship.
Our Scotland correspondent Kieran Jenkins is in Edinburgh. Nicola Sturgeon has accused Theresa May tonight of provoking a shambles and ignoring Scotland's interests altogether. No love lost there then, Kieran?
Absolutely not, John. The First Minister raging at the mess she says the Tories are making, chaos that she says makes the case for independence stronger every day. But you know what? Nicola Sturgeon's comments weren't even the most vicious, levelled at a Tory from Scotland today. That came from within their own ranks, from the Scottish Secretary himself, David Mundell, in a savage interview about the Brexit Secretary, the former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, over his resignation, which is funny because David Mundell and Ruth Davidson widely thought to have hinted themselves that they would quit over fishing or the integrity of the union, which of course many Tories believe is under threat in this deal. Both are now staying, both say they're satisfied. How satisfied is the fishing industry tonight? Have a watch of this.
As the boats came in at Peterhead this morning.
You were at sea when this Brexit deal was agreed.
I haven't heard anything about Brexit.
Among those who had heard, some wondered, had Britain's fishermen just been sold out?
160. Are you surprised? Are you really surprised?
Are you surprised?
No, not really.
Are you disappointed?
Very disappointed. We've been disappointed since we left school. Don't worry about it.
The deal, says the Prime Minister, means we're leaving the common fisheries policy, the EU rules over fishing access.
An essential condition for the single customs territory to cover fisheries.
And in its place, says the EU's chief negotiator, will be a new agreement over fishing access.
Michel Barnier is already talking about access to waters and fishing opportunities as part of the new agreement.
That means we don't get our waters back.
Don't get your waters back.
On the back of us,
it was hinted Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson and the Scottish Secretary David Mundell might even quit if the deal compromised fishing or gave a different status to Northern Ireland.
Can you sell it to the Cabinet, Mr Raab?
Resigning ministers, including the Brexit Secretary, believe the agreement would undermine the union.
Does this agreement meet your needs?
But Ruth Davidson and David Mundell believe their red lines have not been breached, the latter now openly scrapping with his former cabinet colleague.
I'm not taking lessons on standing up for our United Kingdom from carpetbaggers. This is more about manoeuvring and leadership. I'm absolutely committed to the integrity of the United Kingdom.
First Minister. Talk of it, tired old rhetoric.
The verdict from Scotland's First Minister.
People the length and breadth of the UK are seriously worried about their jobs, about their living standards, all of which are on the line because of the ideology of this Tory government and the complete shambles that they have made of the negotiation.
What's your hunch about how this is going?
I don't think it's going to be good.
Supplies of optimism running low today as Brexit and perhaps the government itself are on the line.
So let's now see what voters think, and we're in Knutsford tonight in the constituency of Esther McVeigh, who resigned as Work and Pension Secretary this very morning, saying the Brexit deal does not honour the result of the referendum. Do her constituents agree? Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon is there. Claire.
Well, Esther McVeigh has only been the MP for this area since last year's election. She was picked after her predecessor quit Parliament to concentrate on running his newspaper down in London. This is a safe Tory seat, but people here also voted Remain in the referendum. And talking to people here, they frankly say Esther McVeigh is not their concern right now, but they say they are genuinely worried about where we go next with Brexit. The Tory heartland of the north, this is the turf of the Cheshire set. In its tea shops and delis, there's no sign of no-deal Brexit bulk buying. But there is a sense of reluctant resignation at what's next.
I don't think asking me what we should do to get out of the mess is going to make a great deal of difference, because the people who might be able to make a difference won't be listening to me. people.
This man didn't want to tell me his name. He seemed bemused as to why journalists hang around on streets asking people for their views. But not all politicians give as thoughtful answers.
There were numerous stages at which we didn't have to get into this mess. Some of those decisions were done for political reasons, so I think that was stupid. But you started off asking me what do we do about the mess we're in.
And you think we shouldn't be in it?
Well, I don't think the stupidity that got us into it has changed.
Tatton is safe Tory, but it's given the party the odd problem in the past.
Neil Hamilton on the one hand and Martin Bell on the other.
1997, the Battle of Knutsford Heath. Today, another former Tatton MP used his newspaper to add to the pressure on Theresa May. While George Osborne's successor, Esther McVeigh,
Mr. Speaker,
quit the cabinet, her resignation letter saying she couldn't vote for the Brexit deal and look her constituents in the eye. Some constituents seem to be more Team May than Team McVeigh, though.
Theresa May, in all good faith, has done the best that she can. I think it's an extremely difficult decision that's had to be made.
I think there is more division yet to come. I think we will end up going out with nothing. And we'll just have to work it out from then. But who will, I don't know. I look at poor Theresa May and I think, oh, crikey, why did you take it on? But who would have taken it on? So we might have had, I have to say, Boris Johnson.
For all the talk of a divided Brexit Britain, it seems exasperation and uncertainty are the things that now unite it. Claire Fallon, Channel 4 News, in Knutsford.
So back here in Westminster, what now for Theresa May and what indeed for Brexit? To discuss all that, I'm joined by the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, and by the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams. Fraser Nelson, what do you know, or what does your very profound ear to the ground tell you of the real threat to Theresa May?
Well, there's a lot of discontent, but the ERG, the European Research Group, they had a WhatsApp discussion today saying, is it time to go in for the kill? And they thought, no, not now. If we did a leadership coup right now, a confidence motion, she would probably win. Under the Tory rules, if she wins, she's safe for a year. You can't challenge her until well into the other set of negotiations.
What about these letters, though?
Well, we've had Jacob Rees-Mogg and about 15 other Tories say they've sent them in. They need 48. But the rest will come in a batch. Other Tories who want her gone are keeping these letters in the envelopes, so they coordinate, but don't want to let them dribble. They want to control the time of the challenge if it comes, and they think today that the time is not now.
And even if the challenge comes, is she in trouble?
Well, that's difficult, of course. You know, she once had lunch with a senior chap in politics, saying how much. Oh, David Cameron, right? And he basically, she asked him, like, how much do you have to win by the confidence motion to survive? And he was saying, 1. And she goes, yes, that's what I think. So her rationale is, if you won even by 1 in the confidence motion, then you'll still be all right. Practically, is that true? I doubt it. Do you imagine hundreds of Tories vote against you, or 100? Could you really survive? But she is willing to stare them down, thinking, and she could be right, but none of them have actually got it together enough to challenge her.
Now, Zoe Williams, do you sense at all, given that Mrs May put no deal, my deal, and
no Brexit
on the table yesterday, do you sense that Remainers are beginning to feel a little hopeful?
Hopeful? I mean, it was extraordinary that she put no Brexit on the table, because she can't have been anticipating the cheer she got in the House of Commons. You know, I think there are a lot of shy Remainers in the Commons who haven't been saying how they feel because there was no kind of political air for them and no space for them, and they didn't actually want to ally with the open Remainers in the Commons. You know, I'm a Remainer. We are kind of emboldened. We are hopeful about this. But the only way I see it, I agree with Fraser. I don't think the chances are very high of a no confidence motion. I don't think the chances are very high of a general election. But I do think the pressure is building. I think if the deal doesn't go through, which it won't, the pressure for a second vote is really building.
Are you surprised, or perhaps do you find it inevitable, that Labour appears not to be exerting any pressure on anybody anywhere at the moment in this contest?
That's a very loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
I'm not particularly surprised. I mean, why interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake? Tories are beating each other up so much, we don't really need the help of a Labour Party. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's quite zen about Brexit. He doesn't really talk about it either way. Yeah. That isn't hurting him too much in the polls, as far as I can work out.
I don't agree with that. I think if he were more... to be honest, if he'd responded more to the democratic pressure in his own party, I think he'd be higher in the polls. I think it's extraordinary that Theresa May can be operating like this and still be beating him in the polls. I think he should, you know, everybody knows he's ambivalent about Europe. But the truth of it is, they had their conference. The CLPs said, we want another vote with an option to remain. That, if he went hell for leather on that, then I think he'd get a bounce like you wouldn't believe.
It doesn't look at the moment as if the government can get a Brexit deal through. Do you think we're already in no-deal territory?
We could be, but Theresa May's gamble is that, first of all, nobody's going to challenge her. Secondly, nobody's going to come up with a better plan. And fundamentally, she thinks that a plan beats no plan. Unless anybody's got a better deal than her, a better thing of getting through Parliament, then she reckons hers will have to pass because there is no practical alternative. Well, apparently he's been offered the Brexit Secretary job today and he's been agonising it, but there isn't really a job there. And I'm not quite sure anybody can fix it.
Well, this is what I did not know, and I fancy myself as a journalist. I didn't realise that actually the political leadership of the Brexit negotiations is a complete charade.
Oh, yeah. No, Raab wasn't in charge of it, and Gove wouldn't be in charge of it, and David Davis wasn't in charge of it.
No, it's a civil servant, so that's partly why Dominic Raab left, because he saw this Brexit agreement of clauses that he didn't write, he didn't welcome, and he found out that Ollie Robbins has been doing it, and Theresa May's been dealing with him, and therefore, why go through this political direction?
I don't really agree with that, because if the civil servants really had been in charge of it, they would have said a year ago, this project, nobody with the enthusiasm has the confidence.
There we must leave it. Thank you both very warmly.